Snow fell like sifted ash over the town of Ash Hollow, muffling the sound of wagons and the bark of far-off dogs. The cold had teeth that winter, the kind that bit through wood and skin alike, and yet a thin ribbon of smoke still rose from the back of the old saloon, where a woman stirred a pot with hands raw from work and frost. Her name was Evelyn May Holloway, 26 years old and worn thinner than her years allowed. The firelight made her cheeks glow, but the rest of her looked ghost-like. Pale dress patched at the elbows, hair knotted and wind-tossed, boots torn at the toes. She hummed softly as she worked, not from joy, but to keep the silence from swallowing her. Inside the saloon, men laughed too loudly, their words slurred and thick with whiskey. She didn't belong among them, only behind the cracked door where she cooked their food for a few coins a week. The owner, Mr. Hanby, paid her just enough to keep her from starving, and even that, he reminded her, was an act of charity. When she brought him a bowl of stew that night, he squinted down at her, as though she were something unfortunate that had followed him home. "I ain't worth much, sir," she whispered, clutching her apron. "But I can cook." He grunted, took the bowl, and waved her away without a word. She stood there a moment, as if hoping for a scrap of thanks, then turned back toward the kitchen, the heat fading from her face as she crossed into the cold again. The wind that slipped through the broken windowpane stung her eyes, and she blinked quickly, pretending it was only the smoke. Outside, the town lay under a white shroud. A few lamps burned along the street, halos of amber in the snow. People still talked about her when she passed. How she'd once come west with a drifter, how he'd left her with debts and a broken heart, how she wasn't decent company. The women at the mercantile turned their backs. The men stared too long. Shame followed her like a second shadow, heavy and unshakable. Still, she worked. She had to. She cooked for those who mocked her, scrubbed their plates, and slept on a bed of flour sacks behind the smokehouse. Sometimes, in the blue hours before dawn, she imagined a better world where her hands weren't always cold, and her name wasn't whispered like sin. That evening, the storm worsened. Snow thickened in the air until the town disappeared. Evelyn pulled her shawl tight and stepped outside to fetch wood, but the wind nearly pushed her back. Her fingers were numb before she reached the pile. The first log slipped, hit her boot, and vanished into the white. She cursed softly, breath clouding in the air, then heard it, the creak of leather and the slow tread of boots behind her. She turned, heart jolting. A man stood a few yards away, tall as the doorframe, shoulders broad beneath a buffalo hide cloak. His hair, long and white as frost, spilled over his chest. Bare skin gleamed beneath, muscles roped and scarred, chest bare to the cold. His eyes, dark amber steady, rested on her without cruelty or curiosity, just quiet seeing. The snow swirled around him, but never seemed to touch him. Evelyn's breath hitched. She knew who he was, or rather what people said he was, the old Apache who lived beyond the river, a ghost from another war. Children whispered his name like a charm against bad dreams. Sahale Grey Wolf. Some said he'd killed men with his bare hands. Others swore he'd once been a healer. Whatever the truth, he carried silence the way others carried weapons. I didn't see you there," she stammered, clutching her shawl tighter. He didn't answer, only glanced at the fallen log, then back at her. In one motion he stepped forward, lifted the entire bundle of wood she'd been struggling with, and set it by her door. The gesture was simple, but the strength behind it, calm, unforced, made her throat tighten. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded once. His breath misted in the air, mingling with hers for a heartbeat before he turned away. The snow swallowed him as quickly as it had revealed him. For a long time, she stood there, her hands pressed to the warmth of the wood he'd touched. That night she built the fire higher than usual. The flames crackled, painting her face in gold and copper. She ate a bowl of her own stew for once, savoring the time and fat she'd saved for herself. The heat filled her chest, but it wasn't just the stew. It was the strange, quiet kindness of that man. A ghost, the town said, but ghosts didn't lift firewood. Days passed. The snow kept falling, burying fences and wagons alike. The saloon ran low on supplies, and Mr. Hanby told her to stretch the flour. "Make it thinner," he said. "They'll drink it if it's hot." She obeyed, though the shame burned worse than the frost. By dusk, The firewood was gone again. She stepped outside with the axe, determined to manage on her own. The wind tore at her shawl, and the first swing missed, splitting nothing but snow. The second struck crooked. On the third, the handle cracked in two. She bit her lip, furious, and sank to her knees in the drifts. Then, footsteps again. She froze, thinking she'd imagined them, until a shadow loomed beside her. Sahel stood there, silent as before, holding a new handle carved from pine. He knelt, slid it through the axe head, and tested the weight. It fit perfectly. Evelyn didn't speak. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She wanted to thank him again, but her voice wouldn't form. Instead, she watched as he struck the first log clean through, the blade gleaming red in the firelight. He set 3 split pieces by her door, then handed her the axe. When their fingers brushed, her skin burned from more than the cold. "Keep it sharp," he said, his voice deep, gentle, like the rumble of distant thunder. It was the first time she'd heard him speak. She nodded, unable to find words. He turned away once more, vanishing into the swirling white. Only his footprints remained, already filling with snow. Inside, she stood before the fire, listening to the hiss of sap and the whisper of wind against the roof. Her hands trembled as she reached for her stew pot. The soup inside was thin but warm, a faint comfort against the hunger that had lived in her bones too long. She poured a bowl, set it near the window, and sat with her back to the glass. The storm outside howled like a living thing, but the sound no longer frightened her. She thought of Sahel, the way the light had touched the edges of his white hair, the steadiness in his eyes, and for the first time in many months, the loneliness inside her shifted. It didn't vanish, but it made room for something else. Something she didn't yet dare to name. The next morning, she rose early. The snow had stopped, and dawn glowed pink over the horizon. She stepped outside and her breath caught. The axe rested where she'd left it, but beside it lay a small bundle wrapped in hide. Dried herbs, strips of venison, and a smooth piece of cedar carved into the shape of a flame. Her fingers shook as she unwrapped it. Beneath the carving was a single mark burned into the wood. His symbol, the curved line of a wolf's tail. She looked toward the treeline. It was quiet there, nothing but frost and stillness. Yet she felt his presence in the hush, in the breath of the wind, in the faint warmth the cedar seemed to hold even in the cold. Evelyn pressed the carving to her chest. She didn't know what it meant, gift, warning, or promise, but it was the first thing anyone had given her in years that wasn't pity. The fire inside her cabin waited, flickering. She turned back toward it, snow crunching beneath her feet, unaware that beyond the pines, a pair of amber eyes watched her go, patient as the mountain itself. The storm had passed, but something else had begun to move. Quiet, certain, unstoppable as spring beneath the ice. The snow didn't stop, it only changed its rhythm. Some days it whispered down like sleep. Other days it fell sideways, hissing against the walls of Ash Hollow, as if the wind itself were angry. By midwinter, half the town's roofs had sagged, and one night the old boarding house gave way with a groan that split the silence. Evelyn woke beneath a rain of plaster dust, and the cry of Mrs. Dawes shouting for help. She dragged the woman out by her shawl, into the freezing street. The building leaned like a drunk against the moonlight, smoke curling through the rafters. By dawn, there was nothing left but ruin. Mrs. Dawes was taken in by a cousin. The men dragged away the beams. But no one looked twice at Evelyn standing in the snow, her few belongings tied in a bundle. They had no place for her. Charity, they said, had its limits. She watched them go, breath clouding, her skin numb beneath her torn coat. The streets were empty again, the silence deep and white. Then she saw it, across the frozen creek, faint but steady. A single column of smoke rising from beyond the pine ridge. She knew whose fire that was. She walked toward it because there was nowhere else to go. Her feet sank into drifts, each step slower than the last, but she didn't stop. The pines closed around her, dark and still, their needles whispering secrets in the wind. The smoke grew thicker. Her heart thudded with exhaustion, and something she didn't yet dare name. Hope, maybe, or shame pretending to be it. The cabin appeared like a memory taking shape. Low roof, heavy logs, a narrow chimney exhaling warmth into the endless cold. She hesitated at the door. The air smelled of cedar and fire and something faintly sweet, juniper tea. Her knuckles hovered before the wood, trembling. Before she could knock, it opened. Sahel stood there, filling the doorway. His white hair glowed in the dimness, and the lines around his eyes seemed carved by wind and mercy both. For a heartbeat neither of them spoke. Then he stepped aside. Evelyn entered. The warmth hit her like a confession. Inside was spare but clean, furs stacked against one wall, shelves of dried herbs, a small pot simmering on the fire. A carved wolf's head watched from the mantel. She lowered her bundle, unsure where to stand. "I'll work for food," she murmured, her voice barely carrying. "Just until the thaw." He didn't answer at once. Instead, he ladled something from the pot, a thick broth with pieces of rabbit and roots, and handed her a wooden bowl. His fingers brushed hers, rough and warm. "Eat," he said. She did. The flavor filled her throat, earthy and rich. For months she'd fed herself scraps. Now every spoonful felt like forgiveness. He watched her quietly, not as a man watching a woman, but as someone measuring her breath against the world. When she finished, he pointed toward the hearth. "Rest there." She obeyed, curling near the flames. Her eyelids fluttered, heavy with heat and exhaustion. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered, "Why help me?" His answer came after a pause, low and steady. "Cold takes enough without our giving it more." She slept. When morning came, she woke to the sound of chopping. Through the window she saw him bare-chested, splitting wood, steam rising from his skin in the pale light. Each swing was deliberate, graceful, more ritual than labor. She watched in silence, pulse unsteady, then rose to fetch the pot and start the fire. It felt strange, almost holy, to do something so small in someone else's peace. Days found their rhythm. She cooked while he worked. Sometimes he returned from the forest with game, sometimes only with silence. He taught her how to dry meat, how to mend a snare, how to listen for snow's hidden weight before it fell. She stitched his coat with thread pulled from her own hem, and he carved handles for her pots from cedar. Words were few, but they learned each other's pauses. One night, when the wind howled like wolves, she asked, "Do you ever go to town?" His eyes flicked toward the door. "No more. They call you a ghost." He stirred the fire, expression unreadable. "Then I am safe from them." She wanted to say she understood, that names could chain or free a person, but her throat closed around the thought. Instead, she poured him tea, and in the quiet that followed, she felt something inside her unclench. The thaw seemed far away, but the cabin softened time. She found herself humming as she cooked, small tunes she hadn't remembered knowing. Once, when she burned her hand on the kettle, he caught it in his palm before she could pull away. His thumb traced the redness gently. "You heal fast," he murmured. The words felt heavier than they should, like they carried more than skin. Outside, the snow brightened under the moon. A wolf howled in the distance, answered by another. She thought of the town, of Mrs. Dawes' whispering, of Hamby's smirk, of all the eyes that measured her worth by what she could serve. Here, no one asked. Here, she breathed. But peace never comes untested. Late one afternoon, hoofbeats broke the stillness. 3 men rode into the clearing, faces red from drink and cold. She recognized one, the blacksmith's brother, eager to prove his hate. "Evelyn!" He shouted. "Town says you're shacked up with that savage. Come out." Her pulse hammered. Sahel stepped outside first, bareheaded, the snow swirling around him. He said nothing. The riders laughed, calling him ghost, witchman, worse. The blacksmith's brother raised his rifle. "We'll take the girl home proper." Evelyn's voice cracked as she ran forward. "Don't." But Sahel didn't move to fight. He only stood there, eyes calm as stone. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Then, in one swift motion, he took a single step closer. The rifle wavered. Something in his gaze, not anger, not threat, but the certainty of old storms, made the men falter. The leader spat, muttered a curse, and turned his horse. Within minutes, they were gone, their tracks filling with snow. Evelyn's knees nearly gave. He turned to her slowly. "They won't return soon," he said. Why didn't you stop them? She asked, trembling. He looked toward the pines, where wind was already burying their trail. Because snow remembers mercy longer than blood. That night she couldn't sleep. She watched him from across the fire, the orange light catching the scars on his shoulders. He was old, yes, but not weak. Everything about him carried weight and quiet, like a mountain that chose not to crush what lay beneath. When the embers dimmed, he rose and draped a fur across her lap. "You'll freeze if you keep staring at ghosts," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "You're no ghost." His eyes lifted to hers, steady and unreadable. "Not yet." Then he went to the door and stepped outside, leaving her with the crackle of the fire and a pulse that would not slow. Outside, the wind shifted, whispering through the pines as if repeating words she couldn't quite hear. The snow had begun again, light and fine, falling in spirals through the dark. She thought of the men's torches, the way fear lived in people longer than hunger, and wondered how long before that same fear came back for her. She lay down near the fire, clutching the fur he'd given her, the scent of cedar and smoke wrapping her like a promise. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf cried once, mournful and proud. She closed her eyes, listening until sleep took her, and never noticed the faint flicker of another lantern beyond the ridge, swaying closer through the storm. When the first thaw came, the snow didn't melt, it sighed. Water trickled from the eaves like a secret being told too soon, and the pines outside Sahel's cabin began to hum with the weight of change. Evelyn watched it all from the doorway, her shawl drawn close. For the first time in months, the air no longer bit her lungs. The world smelled of wet bark, pine sap, and something faintly hopeful. She had grown used to the rhythm of the mountain, the silence, the chopping of wood, the scent of cedar smoke curling through the rafters. But as the snow softened, so did her rest. The closer spring crept, the louder the memory of town became. It was a sound that haunted her sleep. Women whispering, men's laughter, her own name said like a bruise. One morning, she told Sahel she would walk to town. He looked up from sharpening his knife, eyes narrowing just slightly. "For what?" "Flour," she said. "And salt. We're near out." He turned the blade in his hand, the light catching the edge. "You'll find salt," he said quietly, "but not peace." She smiled faintly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'll risk it." The path to Ash Hollow was half ice, half mud. Her skirt soaked through by the time she reached the ridge, and her boots squelched with every step. She could see the town now. Chimneys smoking again, horses tied outside the smithy, laundry flapping like flags of surrender. For a moment, she almost turned back. But hunger was louder than pride. At the mercantile, all conversation stopped the moment she entered. Mrs. Dawes was there, wrapped in a shawl brighter than her face. "Well, look what the storm blew back," she said, her voice sweet as vinegar. Evelyn's hands trembled as she gathered her few items. A sack of flour, 2 candles, a pouch of salt. She placed coins on the counter, head bowed. "Living with him now, are you?" Mrs. Dawes asked. "That old savage in the woods? Folks say he keeps you like a pet." A man near the stove chuckled. Another muttered something about ghost wives. Laughter rippled through the room like spilled oil. Evelyn wanted to vanish into the floorboards. The shame pressed her shoulders down, but when she looked up, her voice, though small, did not shake. "He saved my life." Mrs. Dawes snorted. "So that's what they call it now." Evelyn took her bundle and left without another word. Outside, the wind burned her cheeks. She didn't cry until the ridge hid the town behind her. Then she dropped to her knees, salt spilling from the torn bag, melting tiny wounds into the snow. When she reached the cabin, dusk had already settled. Sahel was mending a snare by the fire. He glanced up once, noting her red eyes, her clenched jaw, but said nothing. He only took the bundle from her, set it aside, and poured her a cup of tea. "They know I'm here," she whispered finally. "They knew," he said. "They've just remembered how to hate." She flinched. "I shouldn't have gone. You warned me." He stirred the fire with a stick, sparks rising like fireflies. "You went because you still want to belong." The words cut sharper than any accusation. She stared into the flames until the heat blurred her vision. Is that wrong? No, his voice softened. It's human. That night, she dreamt of the town again, of Mrs. Dawes's voice, of eyes that judged, of the word pet echoing like a curse. When she woke, her throat ached from holding back tears. She rose before dawn, kneading dough with trembling hands, filling the cabin with the smell of bread. By noon, she carried a loaf to the edge of the woods where a boy had once lingered, the orphan Ben. He appeared again, timid and thin, watching her from behind a tree. She knelt, holding out the bread. "Take it," she said softly. He did, tearing off a piece and stuffing it into his mouth. His eyes widened. "They said you died," he murmured. "Not yet," she smiled faintly. "Tell them I bake now." When he left, she stood for a long while, watching his small figure vanish toward town. The ache inside her eased just enough to let a sliver of pride through. But mercy doesn't stay hidden for long. Within days, riders came, 3 again, same faces as before. This time, Sahel was not outside when they arrived. Evelyn stepped onto the porch before they could dismount. "Back to the mountain witch, are you?" One sneered. "Preacher sent us. Says the town don't need no heathen ghosts stealing our women." Evelyn's heart pounded, but her voice held. "I'm not stolen. I'm fed." They laughed, the sound ugly in the still air. One spat into the snow. "That's what he tells all his pets, I reckon." Before she could answer, the cabin door opened. Sahel filled the frame, silent as dusk. His white hair moved faintly in the wind, his chest bare beneath the cloak. The riders went quiet. There was something about him, something that made even mockery falter. "Leave," he said simply. The leader smirked. "You got no right to." Sahel stepped down from the porch. Not fast, not threatening, just near enough that the horses shifted uneasily. His eyes never left the man's face. "Snow keeps memory," he said, voice low. "You want yours buried here?" The man's grin faltered. A moment later, they turned their horses and rode off, swearing under their breath. The silence that followed was heavy as snowfall. Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "They'll tell everyone," she whispered. "They already have." He turned back toward the fire, as if it mattered no more than the wind. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the old grief coiled beneath calm. She wanted to touch him, to thank him, but her hand froze halfway. He noticed, glanced at her hand and said nothing. That evening, as snow began to fall again, she stood by the window. The town lights flickered faintly beyond the ridge. Somewhere out there, people were talking about her, turning her life into a story they could hate safely. She looked at Sahel sitting by the hearth, carving something small from cedar. "Do you ever wish you'd left this land?" she asked. He didn't look up. "I did once," he said. "But leaving doesn't stop their fear. It only feeds it. What if they come back?" "Then they come." He smiled faintly, a weary thing that carried both sorrow and strength. "The mountain outlives men with small hearts." The words should have comforted her, but they didn't. Not fully. Because she realized something deeper. That peace with him meant war with everyone else. In the days that followed, she found purpose in defiance. She baked more loaves, gave them to Ben and others who wandered hungry. When Mrs. Dawes passed through the ridge to fetch water, Evelyn greeted her politely. The woman flinched, muttered something, and hurried away. Even that small courage tasted like victory. Sahel never praised her, never scolded her. But once, as she placed another loaf near the fire to rise, he said, "Bread feeds more than mouths. You're teaching them that." She didn't answer. She only smiled, small and secret. That night as they ate together, the fire crackled low. A sudden knock shattered the quiet. Both froze. Another knock, harder this time. Sahel rose, reaching for the knife. "Stay," he said. But she followed anyway, heart hammering. When he opened the door, the wind rushed in, scattering ash from the hearth. Reverend Cole stood there, lantern swinging, snow in his beard. His face was pale, strained between duty and fear. "Sahel," he said. "They're planning something in town." I tried to stop it. What? Evelyn whispered. The Reverend hesitated. They say you've bewitched her. That she's not herself. Tomorrow night, they mean to burn the cabin. The words hung between them, cold as the wind. Evelyn's breath caught. Sahel's eyes didn't flicker. He only reached for her hand and closed it around the small carving he'd made, a wolf curled around a flame. Then we let them come, he said softly. Fire purifies more than it destroys. The Reverend's lantern guttered in the wind. Beyond the trees, faint and far, torches already flickered like stars. The first torch appeared at the tree line like a false dawn. Then another and another, until the forest glowed with trembling light. Snow fell slow and silent, muting the men's voices as they gathered in the clearing below the cabin. Their shapes flickered through the pines, thick coats, rifles slung, faces hard with fear pretending to be righteousness. Evelyn stood by the window, her breath fogging the glass. They came, she whispered. Sahel didn't look surprised. He tied his cloak around his shoulders, the white of his hair shining against the dark fur. The knife at his belt gleamed once before vanishing into shadow. They were always coming, he said quietly. Now they are only late. She wanted to tell him to run, to hide deeper in the mountains where no one could find him. But the thought died when she saw his eyes, calm as the frozen river, ancient and unyielding. He had seen too many fires to flee from one more. The first shout rose from below. Bring her out. We'll take her home clean. Evelyn's hands trembled. They mean to burn it, Sahel. To burn you. He turned to her, voice low. Fire is not their god, little one. It answers to no man. He moved to the door, but she blocked him, clutching his arm. Don't go out there. Please. His gaze softened. If I stay, they burn you with me. I don't care. You should. He reached up, brushed his thumb across her cheek. The touch stilled her trembling. You carry warmth the world forgot. Protect it. Before she could speak, he stepped outside. The cold swallowed him instantly. Snow swirled around his bare chest, each flake turning to steam against his skin. The men fell quiet. Even their torches seemed to hesitate, their flames bowing in the wind. Sahel stopped halfway down the slope, his breath rising in slow clouds. Go home, he said, his voice carrying through the night like the toll of a distant bell. There is no evil here. A man stepped forward, Reverend Cole's warning forgotten. It was the blacksmith's brother again, his face red with drink and hate. You don't tell us what's evil, ghost. He shouted. You've bewitched her, turned her against her own kind. I turn no one, Sahel replied. She walks where her soul is fed. The man sneered. Then let's see what feeds you. He raised his rifle. The shot cracked through the night, echoing off the mountains. Evelyn screamed. Sahel staggered, the snow blooming red beneath him. But before the man could reload, Sahel was already moving. He crossed the distance between them like thunder, caught the barrel in his hand, and snapped it clean. The men froze. He could have killed them, every one, but he didn't. He simply let the broken rifle fall to the ground. Enough, he said, voice shaking with the weight of mercy. Evelyn ran down the slope, skirts tangling in the snow. She reached him just as the men backed away, their courage faltering under the sight of him bleeding yet unbroken. They're afraid, she whispered. They should be afraid of themselves, he murmured. His blood dripped into the snow, dark and steady. The blacksmith's brother clutched his shattered hand, eyes wide. You'll pay for this, he hissed. No, Sahel said, lifting the man's arm gently. You will live for it. And before anyone could stop him, he tore a strip from his own cloak and bound the man's wound. The others watched, speechless, as the giant Apache tied the knot with quiet care. Mercy broke them faster than violence ever could. One by one, they turned their horses, torches sputtering as they fled into the trees. The last torch fell into the snow, hissing out in a trail of smoke. The silence that followed was deeper than the storm itself. Evelyn helped Sahel back up the hill, her hands slippery with his blood. Inside the cabin, she pushed him into the chair by the fire, and tore her skirt to bandage the wound. The bullet had grazed his shoulder, but the bleeding was heavy. Her breath came fast, her voice cracking. "You could have killed them." He smiled faintly, eyes half closed. "Killing is easy. Keeping fire alive is harder." Tears blurred her vision. "You call this living?" He opened his eyes, their light dim but steady. "For the first time in many winters, yes." She pressed her forehead to his hand, her heart breaking against the weight of everything she couldn't say. Outside, the snow thickened, sealing the world in white. The scent of smoke and cedar filled the cabin. She thought of the torches, of the men who'd fled, of how hatred melted faster than courage once mercy touched it. He stirred, voice faint. "Do not remember this night for its fear." "Then for what?" She whispered. "For the fire that didn't burn." She looked at him, his skin pale against the flickering light, and something inside her cracked open. She realized she was no longer the woman who had begged for work in shame. She was something new, something steadier. His fire had caught her, but it hadn't consumed, it had revealed. When his breathing slowed, panic clawed at her chest. She fed the fire, boiled water, tore more cloth. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "Don't go." He reached out blindly, found her wrist, and held it with surprising strength. "If I go," he murmured, "it will be to make room for spring." "No," she choked. "Not yet." He smiled then, barely. "Then not yet." The hours crawled. She kept him alive with heat and prayer, whispering stories to fill the silence. How she'd once dreamed of running away to the sea, how she'd wanted a name that didn't taste like dirt, how she'd stopped believing in kindness until a stranger fixed her stove. His lips curved, faintly, as if he remembered the night as well. When dawn came, the storm had died. The world outside was silver and still, untouched. She stepped to the window. Smoke rose from the valley, not from torches, but from chimneys. The town had woken, and though she could not hear their words, she imagined them quieter now. She turned back to the fire. Sahel was awake, eyes open, face lined with exhaustion and peace. He reached for something by his chair, a small carving of cedar, polished smooth. He placed it in her palm. It was shaped like two hands cradling a single flame. "For you," he said softly. "To remind you what warmth costs." Her throat tightened. "And what it gives." He nodded once. "That too." Outside, a crow called, sharp and lonely. The sound echoed across the white valley. She rose, walked to the door, and looked toward the town far below. For the first time, she didn't feel the distance as exile. It felt like protection, like grace earned by fire and snow. Behind her, the fire crackled. She turned to see him watching her, the light painting gold through his white hair. For a moment, it seemed he wasn't old at all, but eternal, made of the same fierce patience as the mountains themselves. She went to him, knelt by the chair, and pressed her lips to his scarred hand. "You're mine now," he whispered, barely audible, and she didn't argue. The wind rose again, carrying with it the faint scent of thaw. Somewhere beyond the pines, a wolf howled once, neither sorrowful nor triumphant, only alive. Evelyn closed her eyes and breathed. The fire answered with a soft hiss, as if promising it would never go out.